Hi, Charles SirBookSage here. Sorry for that slight delay in getting started. My sister talks a lot. Hi, Car. Anyway, today, now that I'm back after a little hiatus for October, because my sister was actually down here for the whole month, pretty much. She's back home in New York now. I'm back talking about Marvel today. So I figured first live stream back, I just pick a nice, simple, easy topic. And I'm going to just be talking about mainly the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. They're going to be, well, Fantastic Four is on their schedule. X-Men still isn't. But I'm starting to hear some of the ideas that apparently they're bandying around on how to bring them in. And they don't sound all that good. So I figured today I would kind of go over what I would do, how I would bring the Fantastic Four and the X-Men into the MCU. So, now, before I dive into that, however, I do want to talk about Spider-Man very briefly. Until this year, I've only ever seen the original Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi Spider-Man, those three movies. And Spider-Man 2 is in my top 5 comic book superhero movies of all time. And while the third one isn't that great overall, it's a really well done movies. Tobey Maguire is a great Peter Parker Spider-Man. But I finally this year watched the Andrew Garfield ones, Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2. And I really enjoyed those as well. He did a really good job at giving his own sort of unique version of Peter Parker. So you can see the differences between his and Tobey Maguire's. And while I think the first movie, Amazing Spider-Man, is better than Amazing Spider-Man 2, and mainly only because I didn't like the over-the-top changes they made to Electro. But again, it's just personal preference. Jamie Foxx was great in the role. I just wasn't a fan of how they changed his character. That's a tricky thing. I know some of those early Marvel villains, they are kind of like corny and stuff if you really look at how they were presented in the beginning. So a lot of those do need some updating in terms of how their powers work and all those things. But I just thought I didn't like that sort of bumbling, almost autistic sort of treated mean turns into the villain kind of thing. That's just a bad trope that really should go away. But overall, Jamie Foxx himself was great in the role. Now, that said, I did like the dynamic between Peter and Gwen Stacy in that second movie better than the first movie. And even though her death is coming, the death scene was shot so well, it still had a visceral gut punch to it. So very well done job there on their part. Now, the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I never watched those two Andrew Garfield ones. I've never watched the Tom Holland Spider-Mans. I only know Tom Holland as an actor from Captain America Civil War and the Infinity War Endgame movies. So, and he's a great Peter Parker Spider-Man in those appearances. So I went into Spider-Man Homecoming with high expectations, and I did not like that movie at all. Tom Holland just doesn't carry that film and the way he needs to. And I don't know if he's just not a leading man, and this was my first indication that he's not really a leading man at all, because it taught me that, at least in terms of that movie, that he's a really great Peter Parker Spider-Man in an ensemble. But he didn't carry that film for me. I just thought it was a poorly done story. Looked great, and having Happy back was pretty cool. And of course, his best friend is like the best thing about the movie. But overall, I was really surprised at how flat Tom Holland came across as Peter Parker. I just kind of wanted to bring that up as sort of a preface, since I haven't done another Marvel sort of live stream since the one I did a year ago. And I still have to do a two-parter to that one, because that one was going over the individual Disney Plus shows. I think it was WandaVision through Moon Knight. I kind of went across all those. So I do have to do whatever came after that, Miss Marvel or whatever, and the rest. I still have to force myself to finish watching Secret Invasion. I still have the last 3 episodes to go. But that show is just so bad. I mean, shockingly bad, considering some of the other Disney Plus shows I quite like. Anyway, hi. welcome. If you're new here, I'm Charles. This is my SirBookSage channel. I generally talk about science fiction and fantasy in one form or another. Often it's book related, other times it's movie, TV adaptations, and sometimes it's also, I enter into the sort of comic book superhero realm. And tonight, I just kind of want to chat about the how I would introduce the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. And let me go and change that other browser, because I had my live stream going in my other browser. So let's not do that. Anyway, hopefully everything looks good, sounds good. Just let me know in the chat if everything's good on your end. And here's what I've been hearing about how they're thinking about introducing the X-Men and how they're thinking about introducing the Fantastic Four. I read something earlier today online that I know there's the post-credit scene in the Marvels film. Even though I haven't seen the movie yet, I'm aware of what the scene is. And I've seen conversations about they're speculating that the reason that we haven't had the X-Men in the MCU at all, obviously, the obvious reason is they didn't have the rights, is that there just hasn't been X-Men or mutants for the most part in this sort of main timeline. And so they're going to pull an X-Men team in from the multiverse somewhere. Now, the dumbest thing they could do is pull in that whole cast from Fox, because the actors are all just aging out of those characters. They can't really play them. Even Kelsey Grammer, I mean, sorry, the guy's just way too old to play a physically demanding role like Beast. And it's not really a knock on him as an actor. It's just there are realistic physical limitations that people are going to have in certain roles. This is one of the things that I thought was one of the downsides of the Ahsoka show. Rosario Dawson, great casting for Ahsoka in terms of visual and body movement and stuff, but she doesn't have the fighting chops, the physical fighting chops, and she's just not fast enough doing those things. And you could see it in the Ahsoka show with in some of the fighting. She's just not as quick as she should be. And when you saw Hayden Christensen and her in that sort of duel in the World Between Worlds, you could tell he's holding back, because his training regimen back in the day was just like extreme, him and Ewan McGregor, and you could still see he has all of that sort of muscle memory. So it's important when they cast the X-Men and bring them in that they have to cast people young enough who are going to play these characters for the next 15 years. That's the expectation these actors and actresses coming into these roles really should have. So while I'm fine with the Fox X-Men cast being in Deadpool 3, because you can have a blast with them, and I expect a lot of them to show up in that, I don't want to see that any of them really come across. The only actor I would say you're fine keeping is Michael Fassbender, because you can just have a Magneto at that age come in to the MCU. And if they're going to go that sort of weird route where they're just not going to have them homegrown in our timeline, they're just going to pluck them out of a multiverse, a couple of things. One, if you can do that, then give us Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., bring them back with the X-Men, so we can have Melinda May and Mac, Fitzsimmons, Coulson, the whole team. Bring them all back. Because if you're going to start plucking things from other multiverses, then there's no legitimate reason, unless the actors on that cast doesn't want to do it, there's no reason to not bring all of them back. So, anyway. But here's what I would do, how I would handle bringing the X-Men in from a multiverse. One, I wouldn't, but I would bring Professor X, Xavier, and Eric, Magneto. You could bring just the two of them. Like, what is this? I think they're calling it convergence or something. These sort of multiverse incursions. We saw one at the end of the Multiverse of Madness when Charlize Theron shows up. And I haven't watched the Loki season 2 yet. I imagine there's probably some related to that as well. But what you can have is something went down. Xavier and Eric, they have this sort of long-term like friendship, animosity to each other. It's, it goes back and forth between the two things. So if they're going to go the route of bringing the X-Men in from a multiverse, which is one of the newer theories now based on the Marvel's end credit scene, I would have it where it's just Xavier and Eric, Magneto, who come through. Nobody else from none of the other X-Men. I would have something went down between these two men, and that pitted the X-Men against Magneto's Brotherhood, and whatever they did ripped a hole in the fabric of space and time, created one of those events, and the only two that survived the destruction of their multiverse are these two, are Xavier and Eric, and they would then land in our timeline, our Earth, the MCU Earth, and then they would then each here go about like setting up the X-Men, Xavier building a new X-Men here, Eric building a new Brotherhood here, and you'd have a really interesting dynamic if you did that, because Xavier would be looking for our world's version of these characters and finding them, and then you'd have this strange dynamic where, you know, he's probably gonna struggle with not treating them as the version of them he knew and got killed. So there's a very interesting way to handle it if you do that, just bringing Xavier and Magneto across only, and then each one building their own groups. So that's kind of, if you're going to kind of go with that model, but you have to have homegrown mutants. They've been slowly introducing the X gene and all that stuff. We have now Kamala Khan has now been retconned from Inhuman to mutant, and they had somebody I refused to accept as Namor. That was not Namor, but they were calling Namor in the Wakanda Forever film. So you have mutants are beginning to show up. Now, here's how I would introduce the Fantastic Four and how I would introduce the X-Men. And what I would do is I would take the Phase 1 model that worked for how the MCU started. They had a plan in Phase 1, and it was very successful because it was a very smart plan. And you basically just emulate that here. And for the Fantastic Four, the obvious, and I've heard that they're talking about having the Fantastic Four also start in a multiverse somewhere, in some multiverse where there's no superheroes of any kind, just them. And again, just I don't even want to go down that road. But what you do instead, the smart thing to do with them is you do a period piece. You do what worked with Captain America. The smartest thing they did, Captain America-wise, was introduce him in a World War II setting where he's fighting the Red Skull, old school Captain America. Smart way to go about it. And you do the same with the Fantastic Four. You set it in the 60s. You do one of the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, classic 1960s Fantastic Four stories from the comics. And you get to have Agent Carter and Howard Stark. And you get to see the early days of S.H.I.E.L.D. There's a lot you can do there. And I want the Captain America First Avenger, Agent Carter TV show, Howard Stark, not the Iron Man Howard Stark. Nothing against the Iron Man Endgame Howard Stark actor. But the other Howard Stark, the one that was in the Captain America movie and the Agent Carter series, just a much more entertaining and much more interesting, much more eccentric Howard Stark that I just enjoy more personally. So I would like him. He would just be more entertaining, a fun dynamic. And it would be cool watching him play off Reed Richards as well. So that's kind of what I would want to see. And it makes it easier to introduce the Fantastic Four in that period piece. Kind of has them isolated in that respect, but still in the timeline. And because you have Wolverine is as old as he is, you could even have Wolverine have a cameo in that Fantastic Four movie. And again, all recast Wolverine, brand new Wolverine and all that stuff. But you have an opportunity to just kind of cameo him in there so people kind of get a feel for him. And whichever story you wanted to go with, whether it's a Doctor Doom story or any one of the... there's some great stories back in that. This, I guess, is at the Silver Age of Marvel. Some great stories in the 60s. I've been rereading Daredevil from the beginning, and I'm through that whole section. I just recently finished Stan Lee's run at the whole beginning of Daredevil, and I'm on to the second writer now. And it's fun visiting all those early Marvel comics from the '60s, and you even see like the Fantastic Four make an appearance in one or two of those Daredevil episodes comics. But that's pretty much, I mean, that's a simple setup for them. You just do a period piece, and then at the end of that movie, when whether it's a origin story of how they get their powers, however you want to handle it, you have some cosmic event happen at the end that sucks them through time and drops them into the main timeline. You can even have it like be tie into this whole multiverse stuff, where because I imagine the multiverse can go into different time periods. For all we know, hey, maybe the TVA shows up and grabs them and then just dumps them in our timeline for whatever reasons. There's ways to do it. But just simple, a period piece, it makes the most sense for that team. Now, casting, of course, is very, very critical. You have to get these four people correct. You don't cast them correct, they're not going to work. I mean, some of the casting over on Fox, Sony, some of it's really good and some of it's really bad. And it was a very mixed bag when it came to their attempts at the Fantastic Four. So this is something that Marvel's been very good at, but very good at prior to Disney. Disney continues to do a pretty good job at it as well. The casting didn't fall off the edge of a cliff, for the most part, unlike the storytelling and the writing did, sadly. So, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I know they're in sort of a catch-22. I imagine they want big name stars to get people filling in seats, but you also can't be dropping $120 million on just paying the Fantastic Four and the main villain. You can't spend that kind of money before you even write a single scene. So they're in a tough spot. But again, all self-inflicted on their own part for the quality dropping off the edge of a cliff. But again, you just do them as a period piece. You can have a Wolverine cameo. That's pretty simple stuff. It's introducing the X-Men was a bit more complicated and a bit more work. But again, you have the Phase 1 model where they introduced individuals and built up to an Avengers movie. You should do the same exact thing here. And what I would do is I would start off with a Scott Summers Cyclops film, a Aurora Monroe, a Storm movie, and a Wolverine film. The Wolverine film is obvious. But I would do a Scott Summers. I would start with Scott Summers personally, because just like they started with Tony Stark and Iron Man. And for anyone who may be watching this who might think, well, Cyclops is too boring. You can't make a movie that's going to grab everyone the way an Iron Man movie grabbed them. And I completely disagree. Scott Summers is the X-Men. He's its moral compass and its leader. And he's similar to Steve Rogers in some ways, where he's that sort of, these are the rules, this is the right way to go. He's very aspirational in that he believes in the American ideal and all those, truth, honesty, morality, all that kind of stuff. So he's the focus of the team. He's the one that keeps all of them kind of eyes on the prize kind of stuff. And one of the biggest failures, as much as I love those Sony Fox X-Men movies, and I think X-Men 2 is in my top 5 favorite comic book movies of all time as well. The casting was hit and miss. They have yet to properly cast Scott Summers. And no offense to James Marsden as an actor. He was fine in the role they gave him to play, but they have yet to really do Cyclops. Because one of the benefits of like Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark is in that role, when he walks into a room, everyone in that room, all eyes are on Tony. They look to him, they understand, okay, he's in charge of the room now, in whatever form that's going to be. And Chris Evans, in the role of Steve Rogers, has that same vibe, where when he walks in the room, everyone in the room is like, okay, that's Captain America, he's in charge. So Scott Summers needs to have that same presence. You need an actor who can bring that same level of presence, level of command just walking into a room. The people in that room should understand, okay, that guy's in charge, obviously. So and they've not come anywhere near close to nailing the casting for, at least Fox has, for nailing this character. So Scott Summers is going to be one of the most critical casting jobs the MCU, Disney's going to have with the X-Men. You don't get him right, it's not going to work. And if you go back to, I think, the show Criminal Minds, is it Hotch? He was like the main guy in charge of the team. And he was like that bedrock. So you had all these different people on the team with all their different skill sets and talents and things that they were really good at, vulnerabilities that they had. And no matter what they were doing, no matter what was happening to them, Hotch was like that anchor that kept that team on track, kept them focused. And when stuff went down with that actor and they fired him, that showed to me that the dynamic was never the same again, because that's a really hard character to replace in that situation. And Scott Summers is that kind of character for the X-Men. And he's also a very complicated character because he has a lot of self-doubt and a lot of fears because of how dangerous his powers are. And he has a lot of trauma from, which is, this is the She-Hulk joke. Like, everyone's an orphan. Every comic book, every superhero is an orphan. And on that note, what I would do to start a Scott Summers movie is I would start the film with young Scott and his brother Alex with their parents on that airplane. Alien ship shows up out of nowhere. There's only one parachute that they can find, and they strap both Scott and Alex into that one parachute and make them jump. And then Scott assumes his parents are destroyed because the plane is destroyed by the alien ship. And then you have that, show that, and then you have adult Scott waking up in like a sweat. And basically, if you go back and think of the start of the Two Towers, they open the Two Towers with returning us back to Gandalf fighting the Balrog on the bridge in Khazad-dûm. And then when they fall, we stay with them falling and seeing them fighting as they're falling through the air. And then Frodo wakes up. And that's a very effective way to start a film. And for a Scott Summers film, starting it with that childhood traumatic moment where they lost their parents and then ended up going into the foster system, him and his brother being separated from each other, all that stuff. So you start that, it baselines the character, and then you can then, if you want to do your sort of origin story where his powers first emerge, the construction site that he ends up almost killing people at when his powers kind of erupt out of control, Xavier finding him, you have you start with that, and you can tell a really compelling story with this character, because he is a really, really good character. It's hard for me to not pick him as my favorite X-Men, only because he's just one of my favorite Marvel characters. I don't know if I have him in my top 5 or top 10. I think I might. I'd have to go back and look at that live stream where I had that list. I would be surprised if I didn't have him in that. Now, Kitty Pryde might be my favorite X-Men of all time. Nightcrawler might be right there too, but Scott Summers, he is one of those leaders in Marvel. He should be able to go to that Avengers compound in upstate New York that we see in the movies. He should be able to walk in there and go, "You 5 with me," and command a team of Avengers, because he should be able to step in and run that team. Anyway, but you introduce him, you start him, you obviously introduce Jean Grey in that movie, because you have Cyclops, Storm, Wolverine, each get their own movie, and in their films, you introduce as supporting characters the other characters that are gonna become part of the X-Men. Again, this is exactly what Marvel did in Phase 1. Black Widow was introduced in Iron Man 2. Hawkeye was introduced in the first Thor movie. You had them popping up. And another smart thing they did was Coulson and Fury were the connecting tissue in each of these movies, where one or two or both of them would pop up in each of their movies as sort of the connecting tissue to begin stitching them together before we get to the X-Men movie, because it establishes in the viewer that this is all happening in the same world. Because, there's Coulson, or there's Fury. And even the Netflix TV shows did this with the Marvel TV shows on Netflix. You had Rosario Dawson's Night Nurse. She was the connecting tissue throughout the what they labeled the Defenders shows, as well as Turk. Turk was like the street criminal, and he's a really useful character in those kind of shows when you're dealing with superheroes that are more on the street level, like a Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage. They're not dealing with these sort of cosmic stuff like Avengers, X-Men, and others might be dealing with. So you could have characters here like that play the same role. Xavier is an obvious one. Xavier would be that new phase's sort of Fury, if you will, the connecting tissue between each of these disparate people who end up forming the X-Men. And maybe someone like Dr. Moira McTaggart or someone like that as well. You have a couple of people. Then they show up in each of these films. And you also have opportunities to introduce some of these characters in existing properties. For example, if Black Panther 3 movie comes out and Storm is not in that movie, then I don't know what Disney's even trying to do, because she has a connection in the comic books to Wakanda. She's not from there, but she has a connection to them. I think she was even married to T'Challa in the comic books for a while. So it makes sense that if you're going to have a Black Panther 3 movie before you get around to X-Men movies, you cast Storm and you have her in that third film. I mean, I would have had her in the second movie personally over Ironheart, but I know they're doing that whole Armor Wars or whatever stuff they want to do. So they brought Ironheart in instead. But I absolutely would have had Storm showing up in the second Black Panther movie if, again, I was the one running this stuff. I'd have the X-Men here already. The X-Men would have been primed and ready to go right after Endgame. I would have had, as a result of the snapping back and forth, one of the side effects of it would have been the emergence of the X gene. And that would then explain why you would suddenly have mutants popping up. Again, these things are right there. They build the ability to have these things in. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was able to do all of these kind of things. I don't understand why Disney can't do them. For example, they introduced the Inhumans in season 2 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And then the crystals get sunk into the bottom of the ocean, break open, and the Terrigenesis stuff separates out from the stuff that's harmful to the humans, gets into the fish, and fish oil is made, and everyone who's an inhuman who ends up either taking those fish oil pills or eating the fish that have the Terrigenesis in them, they all suddenly start transforming and their inhuman powers come out. So Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. just neatly worked it into the fabric of the story, why with season 3 you're now going to have a bunch of Inhumans running around. So the Marvel has known that they have to find a way to suddenly explain why you're going to have mutants. I think that's one of the things they might have tried to do with Secret Invasion, because even though I haven't watched those last couple of episodes yet, I do know that there's a reference to the X gene is mentioned in there, because the main Skrull bad guy is trying to basically create superpower stuff for himself. I think in the actual comic book story, he replicates the ability of all 4 of the Fantastic Four for himself. But since they don't exist yet, they had to give him different superhero characteristics, I guess. But we'll see. But now I lost my train of thought. But anyway, so Scott Summers, you'd have that movie, you introduce him, or Storm, and again, you introduce Storm in her own movie, and you probably start Storm out in Cairo, because Storm is her mother was a Kenyan princess, her father was, I think, an African-American soldier, maybe, and they get married and move to Harlem, and that's where Storm is born, and then they end up moving back over, I think, to Cairo, and then some war breaks out or something, and her parents are killed in an explosion, an attack, and she's almost killed. She's like buried in the rubble, and Storm has like severe claustrophobia as a result. I don't know that they even touched on that in the Fox X-Men movies. But again, you can, even if you don't open with that, you could have like parts of her backstory sort of playing out throughout her film. But you probably most likely open up with her on the streets of Cairo. She's a pickpocket, she's a thief, and she ends up coming across Xavier. Obviously doesn't know who he is, pickpockets him, and this is how he discovers her and all this stuff. Now in the comics, that happened when she was younger, and then when he comes back, he sees the older her and realizes that that's the same pickpocket. But you can just combine that in the movie and just have, this is how he discovers her and recruits her. So, now again, as for which particular story they want to go with, I have no expectations that they are going to just, like, we're just going to tell the 1980s X-Men. I have no expectations that they're going to do that. They're just not going to do that. Even though it's the easiest layup in the world for them to say, hey, let's do X-Men 101 through X-Men 138, and we'll do that over the course of a bunch of films. I mean, they do have the easiest job in the world. All the characters are created, all their great stories are already written, and their insistence on not doing them is just bizarre. But so who knows what route they want to go with? They can go right to the Morlock stuff if they want to go there, or they can have earlier Storm stuff. It's really up to them. There's so many things to choose from. I just wish whatever era they pick, they just be consistent. And don't have Scott from the 80s and Storm from the 2020. They're going to be so completely out of sync with each other. These are characters that need to journey and grow together as a team. So I hope they just, whatever era they pick, they just have everyone from that era in there. But again, you do their individual films, and then you build up to some sort of event that leads them all to be brought together. And whatever that might be, whether you want to get even more Phase 1 like, they have brought in the Chitauri in the Avengers movie. You could bring in the Brood for the first X-Men movie. There's a lot of options. One of the other key things, however, is Scott's father, and mother were not actually killed by that alien ship. They were taken prisoner and taken out into space. And his mother has since subsequently been killed, but the father escaped captivity, and he founded these sort of space pirates called the Starjammers, and took the name Corsair for himself. And so Corsair and his Starjammers is a whole nother sort of galactic sort of addition to that side of Marvel. So you have someone other than just the Guardians of the Galaxy, where you can do these sort of deep space sort of storylines where you can go and explore all these kind of places. And being pirates, they're going to get themselves up into all sorts of messes. So it gives them an opportunity if they do this. And Fox didn't touch any of this stuff, really touch any of this stuff for the most part. I think, was it the last attempt at Phoenix where they think they might have turned the Hellfire Club into aliens? I can't remember. I only watched it once. So, but yeah, you bring in the Starjammers and you have that connection to Scott. Eventually he finds that his brother Alex is still alive, becomes Havoc. All of this stuff, it is building blocks that you can rebuild the MCU up to some sort of prominence. But it all starts with, you need to cast the right actors and you need to write good stories, something they just don't seem all that interested in doing. Even though I will say the best casting that Disney has done when it comes to Marvel is it Iman Vellani, I think her name is, Kamala Khan. That's great casting right there. Whether you like the character or not is a completely separate thing. She's a great casting choice for the character. I actually enjoyed the Miss Marvel show quite a bit. I was not its demographic. I was not its target audience, but That's to me one of the better Disney Plus Marvel shows. Just the whole stylized with the cartoon like panels and everything is really well done. It had its unique sort of visual style, so I quite liked it. Eventually, I'll see the Marvels movie when it's on Disney Plus, but no rush there. I still have to see the Last Guardians movie. I haven't watched that yet. I recently finally caught up on the all the way through Quantum Mania, and yeah, I don't even want to talk about Quantum Mania or Thor: Love and Thunder right now. But just kind of looking through my notes here just to see what else. And one of the other things too that I would really like is if come on. Again, whatever era they pick from, I wish they would just give us some consistency with the group of X-Men they're going to have. Personally, yes, I'd want them to start more old school. I'd want them to bring in Beast and Iceman and Angel and Jean and start with that core group. And then as you work through your stories, you bring in others, start to show up. You know, where you'll have Nightcrawler and Rogue and Gambit and all them. So you have enough X-Men to do them in phases. Just the X-Men alone, where you can do them in phases. Unlike Avengers, where, you know, we went from the first Avengers to Age of Ultron to Infinity War Endgame, and then they didn't seem to have any plan for anything after that, of what to do with the Avengers. And how long is it going to be? What, 2025 and 2027, I think, before we get the next Avengers films? So they can't drop the ball like that. Once they introduce the X-Men, they have enough X-Men to choose from to go through multiple movie story arcs where team members will come and go over time. And another thing I want to point out too is if they're going to continue to try to marry the TV shows with the movies, I can't for the life of me understand why they don't use post-credit scenes that link them. Like, yes, we know a post-credit scene, mid-credit, post-credit scene is going to like tease the next movie. But if a TV show is the next thing in the story, one of your mid-credit or end-credit scenes should be for the upcoming TV show. You should be directing your movie audience, hey, this is the Disney Plus show you need to watch to continue this plot, to continue the story. And you should have mid and end credit scenes in the season finales of your TV shows that point to the next movie that continues the story. I don't know why. I mean, most of the time you're watching YouTube videos, just about every YouTube video ends with now click on this video here. They have something geared up to take you on the next piece of information or whatever their channel is about. They tee up the next logical thing to watch. The ones who know what they're doing and really good at it. They do all that stuff. So I just think if they're trying to get these TV audience and the movie audience to kind of merge together more than they are, then I don't understand why they're not using these end credit scenes in the movies to point people to the shows. So, I don't know. Just seems a smarter thing to me. It's the 21st century. You're allowed to cross-promote between your movies and your shows, especially if they're all meant to be part of the whole. So, I'm trying to think of... And and as far as Wolverine goes, the Wolverine movie, obviously, one thing I do want to say when it comes to casting casting Wolverine. Now, Hugh Jackman is iconic in the role. That said, there has been an element of Logan as a character that's been missing, because Logan is a character that, if again, going back to you're in the room, you're a bunch of people are hanging out, whatever it is. When Logan walks in that room, on some like guttural, instinctual level, you should feel like that Simpsons meme, that kid on the bus. He's like, I'm in danger, that thing. Some element, even on an instinctual level, you should understand this room just got dangerous, even if you don't know why. That's the kind of element that Hugh Jackman's Wolverine just doesn't have. You know, he's got a lot. He's got the charm. He's got the charisma. He's got the action. He can do all that fighting and all that stuff. Great at all that. But there's this sort of underlying, like just uncivilized violence just below the surface with Wolverine sometimes. And this is just something that Hugh Jackman just doesn't have as an actor, or at least not in this role. 20 years ago, Tom Hardy would have been perfect casting because he has that element to him as an actor. Where I can't remember the name of the film. I think it takes place in Boston. I think he's a bartender. I think James Gandolfini is in it, and I think the bar is like being used as the drop for all these bets or something for all these other bars, and some moron they're going to rob it, and he's like this sort of slow-witted sort of bartender, and he sort of meets this woman that he likes, and the woman has a boyfriend or an ex who's like really violent, and then there's the confrontation in the bar near the end of the movie, where it's just the three of them, and you know, Tom Hardy, his character has got this sort of attitude. And then as he's watching this guy just start to just cross a line, if you're watching Tom Hardy, you see this slight shift, just a subtle shift in his character. And the other guy doesn't realize how much danger he's suddenly in. And that's what you need out of someone playing Wolverine, where just a slight, subtle thing and you sense that danger. So whoever they cast, and Tom Hardy's just too old, because you need someone who's going to be in this role for quite a long time. But they need to have that element to them. And Wolverine is a character you can have a lot of flexibility with. Like I said, you can have him have a short scene in the Fantastic Four period piece, because he'll be around in the 60s. Personally, I'd love for them to just start Wolverine as his own thing. Weapon X days, give us Wolverine being assigned to hunting down the Hulk. Give us that fight from the comics. I don't know any comic book fan who's been reading comics since back in the day like I was. I don't know anyone who doesn't want to see that in live action. Wolverine versus the Hulk. And I think it's Real Rejects, I think, is the reaction channel. They have a guy who's on there sometimes he's their go-to comic book guy. And he has a whole live stream where he goes through, I think he might touch on like his casting choices for a lot of these roles. And one of his ideas to bring Wolverine in is to actually also give Wolverine a Disney Plus show where you can take Wolverine through his, like the 1800s or something. Like take him through his like story arcs prior to him arriving at the current timeline. So you establish Wolverine's whole, like, who he is as his own guy. And then you have the X-Men getting established over here, them crossing paths, and then, you know, Xavier kind of slowly kind of roping, you know, Wolverine into becoming a part of them. So you can take your time and do this. You know, the problem with Fox always had with the X-Men is they always wanted to rush to the big story. They always wanted to rush to Phoenix. And Phoenix needs to play out over 10, 15 years. Like, Jean Grey is another character who should show up in a lot of different movies and TV shows. She's a character who should be popping up everywhere along these next phases of Marvel. Because you want her story to play out throughout all of this stuff. She can be one of the connecting tissues through all these different movies, different TV shows. Because you give her these, you know, she's one of a prominent X-Men. She has specific skills that are going to come in handy. Diplomatic, telekinesis, all these different things. So there are ways to work her in, and you can just slowly watch her character go from, like, what is she, Marvel Girl or something, with a telekinesis, just learning it. You slowly see this slow transformation in her over a period of movies and shows, where when you finally get there, and she gets to be Phoenix for a while before the Dark Phoenix kind of comes out of her and takes over. And if they do that and they give it the time to breathe like it needs, because like the whole Jean Grey to Phoenix to Dark Phoenix, that should play out over 3 phases. Like first Iron Man movie all the way to Endgame. You should have that kind of real estate in that time for her story to be a subplot running through everything. And that culminates in the Dark Phoenix. So that's kind of what I would do. Just to recap, introduce Fantastic Four, a 1960s period piece. Great way to introduce them. You bring back Peggy Carter, Howard Stark, early days of S.H.I.E.L.D. Some cosmic event happens at the end that sucks them forward in time and drops them in our timeline. So they're like Captain America, where they're a bit out of time and you can play with that element. Like I think Ben would probably, the Thing, he would probably struggle the most, have suddenly finding himself in the future. Johnny Storm would be on TikTok and YouTube, and he'd be all over the place having a blast, I think. But Ben Grimm, he would really, I think, struggle, and you'd have a really interesting character study with him, because I would imagine you could have Ben would seek out Bucky, because he'd want to talk to someone who's had this like out of time experience where, like, he'd look for guidance from, because he's going to go to Reed obviously, but Bucky seems to be like someone he would gravitate towards, especially. Bucky's a super soldier, so they could spar together, and but he has that like same experience where being a man out of time. So I think it's someone that Ben could talk to. So there's a lot of things in place that they could make some really compelling stories with these characters. It's just they can't with this just utter lack of writing quality that they've had. I mean, because some of these stories, like Secret Invasion, was just, I just don't know how is it possible you could take that story from the comic books and turn it into that garbage? And it makes you wonder, like, how is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. so good? How did Netflix, Marvel, how is that stuff so good? That first season of Daredevil, that first season of Jessica Jones, that's better than all the Disney plus Marvel TV shows put together. And it almost seems like nobody wants to work for Disney. I don't know. I really don't know what it is. I don't get into that whole industry stuff. I have no real interest in that being a part of my channel. There's plenty of other channels that like dive into all that stuff. I'm just more interested in the stories. So, I guess that kind of is what I wanted to just talk about. Just kind of a casual, just chatting about like how to fix the MCU stuff. But, if they concentrate on these, and it doesn't look like, again, there's X-Men still even on the calendar at all. They're going to have all this other nonsense, like the Thunderbolts and Armor Wars or whatever. Just like, dude, just Fantastic Four should be your priority. That's Marvel royalty, the Fantastic Four. That's their first family. You have Peter Parker as the standalone comic book and the Fantastic Four. That's Marvel royalty. So how in the world you're not building Marvel going forward around the Fantastic Four and the X-Men? It's just mind-bogglingly dumb. Like, what you're doing is failing. Just cut it loose. Let it go. Have the multiverse just reboot the whole universe. If Doctor Who could end Series 5 with the Pandora opens, the Big Bang, and reboot the whole universe to fix Amy Pond's life, then the MCU could reboot the whole universe as well and just start over. But if you're not going to do that, then how in the world you're not prioritizing Fantastic Four and X-Men? I can't understand for the life of me what they're even thinking about doing. They're still just directionless and rudderless right now. And the way these last few movies have just been bombing really bad, and by all accounts, the Marvels doesn't look like it's going to do well on the box office. I think it's probably a movie that I'm probably going to enjoy, because, again, I like some of the individual characters. I like Monica Rambeau on WandaVision. Kamala Khan, Iman Vellani is just endearing as Kamala Khan. I loved the TV show. I really enjoyed it, but I know I'm in the minority on that. So I expect I'm going to enjoy that movie, even if it's probably, I don't expect it to be good. Because just from some of the reviews I've been hearing, the story just seems like kind of dumb. But, well, again, we'll see. There's different elements. Like, Multiverse of Madness is a chaotic mess of a movie, but there's a whole lot of it that I enjoy. And so I rewatch it. Whereas Love and Thunder is the first MCU movie that gave me not one single thing to ever need to turn it on and watch it ever again. Which, that type of failure shouldn't be possible. And especially with Gore the God Butcher. I mean, imagine having Gore the God Butcher and he kills the god in the first 5 minutes and you never see him killing the god for the next 2.5 hours. Like, why? Why did you even have the character in there? They had him in there to lure the people into the theaters because they're expecting to see Thor and Gore the God Butcher duking it out for 2 hours. Nope. Thor crying and being made fun of by everybody. And the Gore the God Butcher doing all its God butchering off screen. So, anyway, don't want to go down those tangents. But, again, casting the Fantastic Four, casting Scott Summers is the most critical casting for the X-Men. If you don't get him right, you can't do the X-Men. And if you can't make a compelling standalone Scott Summers movie, you have no business making an X-Men movie because you won't know how to do it. And all that said, it's good to get back on the Sunday live streams, and I'm actually coming in at under an hour. My last couple of live streams were like 3 hours each, where me talking about Wheel of Time Season 2. And you'll find Wheel of Time playlist down below, Rings of Power playlist down below. I might have the Mandalorian Season 3, like reviews, discussions down below. What else? Malazan Book of the Fallen stuff down below, all that stuff. And like, subscribe, all the things. I'm so close to 2,000 subscribers. Maybe I'm hoping to get there by the end of the year, so clickety-click. Anyway, with that, I'm going to remember to put my mouse over the end stream button ahead of time this time, because I always forget and I sign out, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to end this thing. Anyway, with that said, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you watch this, do you like any of the ideas I've given? Do you think you can do standalone Scott Summers, standalone Aurora Monroe? Obviously, standalone Wolverine movie makes sense. But I'd love to hear what your ideas are for how to bring the Fantastic Four and the X-Men in. And if they're going to do that dumb, hey, let's just grab the X-Men from a multiverse so we don't have to do any work setting them up. No. If you're going to do that, just bring in Xavier and Magneto alone and have them, like, completely at a point where something went down, where their universe was destroyed because of them, and they're just at each other's throats, and one's building the X-Men and one's building a New Mutants team here. They're just Brotherhood team to just go after each other. So, anyway, just let me know down below what ideas you might have for how to bring these storylines in, these characters in. That doesn't just screw everything up even more. And all that said, I am going to go and just kind of relax for the rest of my Sunday night. And then this week, I have to force myself to finally finish Secret Invasion and finally watch Loki Season 2 and Guardians 3. And I think that catches me up on everything. And, yeah. Okay, thank you for watching.